Today I want to talk about Star Trek Discovery Season 1. So there are obviously 2 seasons out, and I watched Season 1 before Season 2 came out, and even Season 2 I watched months ago, but I'm just now getting around to talking about it. Star Trek was on in our house a lot when I was younger, so I have seen bits and pieces of a lot of the different Star Trek series, but I never really watched them, so my knowledge is spotty. I know a lot of the characters' names and have a general idea of how the world works and stuff, but I don't know a lot of specifics. So Star Trek Discovery was the first series where I sat down and I watched it, because when it came out I heard a lot of different things about it and it got me really interested, and it was on Netflix and easy to watch. One of the things that came from me having a very piecemeal knowledge of Star Trek is that I knew what the Klingons were, or who they were, but only in a very vague sense. I didn't really know anything about how the Klingons worked, how their culture worked or anything like that. All I really knew was that they're typically the villains of the Star Trek universe, and war is basically the only thing that I knew. So when they showed up very early on in Discovery, I wasn't necessarily surprised, because I knew that they were an important aspect of the Star Trek universe, but I was surprised at how interesting I found them, because most of my previous experience, and I don't fully know how the Klingons are portrayed in the past series, but I was very surprised with how intrigued I was and how I wanted to learn more about them. And the Klingon characters are some of my favorite characters in Discovery. I thought they were very interesting. I think one of the big advantages of Discovery is the actors, because there are some great actors on Discovery. The entire cast is just great and excellent, and I love all of them. Even when I don't like their characters are so well acted that I'm just in love with them anyway. I have to say, after watching all of Season 1, Philippa Georgiou, I loved her in the original version of her, the actual Star Trek main universe version of her. I thought she was really great. But then also her Terran counterpart is probably my favorite character of the entire show. I love the actress. She reminds me a lot of Catherine from Reign, and if you watched any of my Reign reviews when I was watching Reign, you know that Catherine was my favorite character on Reign. I loved Catherine a lot. And I feel there are a lot of parallels between the two of them, even down to the fact that Catherine was a queen and Philippa in the Terran universe was emperor of the whole world. But they're very similar in a lot of ways, and I just find them completely fascinating as characters. They're both completely terrible and do immoral things all the time. I mentioned before about hearing things about Discovery that really got me intrigued and made me want to watch it. And one of the things I heard was that Tilly seemed to be autistic. A lot of people were watching the early episodes of Discovery and headcanoning Tilly as autistic because she has some autistic characteristics, and that was probably the final straw, because I had heard other things about Discovery that made me want to watch it, but hearing that I was immediately okay, I want to watch the show. And I completely get why people are saying that. Tilly is never said to be autistic in the show, but there are definitely a lot of things she does or says that imply that she is, and so I 100% headcanon her as autistic now, because it does fit into the story and I want it to be true. I know there's a sudden change in my hair being up. The monster of the first season being a tardigrade was a very interesting choice to me, because tardigrades are this weirdly viral microscopic organism. Like, you wouldn't expect a microscopic organism to be as popular as tardigrades are, and seeing like a giant one in space was a very interesting decision. I also liked that there was some discussion about whether the tardigrade was sentient or non-sentient, because we have such like a hard time with that on Earth, like figuring out what intelligence is, and like, because we try to rank animals according to intelligence, but there are a lot of different kinds of intelligence, and so do we just like compare them to human intelligence, or are they intelligent in their own way? This is kind of jumping back to the actors thing, but I forgot to mention this earlier. So Jason Isaacs is in this show, and obviously he plays Lucius Malfoy. And I love Jason Isaacs because he is both in Harry Potter and in Avatar as Commander Zhao, and Harry Potter's my favorite book series ever. Like, he's in the movies, which like aren't my favorite movies ever, but like it's Harry Potter, and Avatar is my favorite TV show ever. So like, I think he's a great actor, and he's in Star Trek Discovery, but I really haven't seen him in that many movies other than Harry Potter, because like Avatar is obviously animated and he's just providing the voice. So I was kind of surprised at how well I could watch it without seeing him as if he were Lucius Malfoy. Another one of my favorite things about season 1 was Michael's relationship with her family. Like, it's very complicated. It's not like a simple, usual family relationship, but I really like that, and I really like how that was handled, and like seeing their relationship explored was very interesting, and I really liked it. Tyler being Vok was like kind of predictable in a sense, but I feel like it was predictable in a good way, because I don't know, I have a lot of feelings about the fact that sometimes plot twists can be done well, but they're only done well if you kind of saw them coming. Like, if they really are out of nowhere and there's nothing that hints at it, then that's a bad plot twist. So there should be hints about what's coming, and I feel like that was done really well, even though it was obvious. Like, to us as the viewers, it wasn't obvious to the characters. And I really liked it, but I also just really love the idea of both Tyler and Vok being in the same body, because that raises so many interesting questions, with the Klingons being like a villain, and then Tyler being human, and having that in the same person, and like his conflicted feelings and seeing both viewpoints when like no one else can see both sides of it like he can, and just everything about that is very interesting to me. I just think it's completely fascinating, like having both a Klingon and a human in one body, and like how that would affect how you view the world, and how confusing it would be when you have two like such different, huge truck outside, two like hugely different worldviews inside like your brain. And then the season ends with them getting a distress call from the Enterprise, and that's like the big cliffhanger of this season and the lead into next season, which I do want to talk about. Maybe as a video, maybe I'll write something on my blog, I'm not sure yet. But those were some of my thoughts about season 1. If you've seen Star Trek Discovery and want to talk about it in the comments, even if you didn't like it as much, feel free to tell me why in the comments and we can talk about it. But I think that is all, and I will see you guys later. Bye!